Our season continues to set up a number of LAATs, where Zala and her astromech stood side by side with Commander Cody. He was silent, and so were the men around her. She stood with her eyes closed, feeling through the Force, practicing what her master had said to her before Master Skywalker requested them to the bridge. The sound of the LAAT rang through her ears. Her master and a wing of starfighters were situated right outside the ground troops as they ascended through the atmosphere. Zala could feel it, the pressure of everything changing as they left the planet itself and entered space. Her hand was holding onto the hooks that hung from the ceiling when she felt the chill roll down her spine. It was space. No, it was something else. She called out to the men inside the dropship, telling them to hold on. The Sith Empire arrived at hyperspace. General Skywalker and a squad of starfighters exited the Venators to provide cover fire for the LAATs. Natabre pulled back and her squad followed her. The starships from the Sith Empire found themselves in a bit of a bind. While Admiral Coburn and General Skywalker believed that the fleet that arrived would be aggressive, they were surprised when they saw that it was far from. The fleet that arrived was just a support fleet full of transports. The entire purpose of this fleet was to ensure the Sith had control over Malastare. The Acolyte and Marauder that were sent here requested their reinforcements after the Separatist fleet was destroyed, and they happened to arrive after the Sith Empire had been defeated. The whole thing was convoluted. The Republic was here because they got reports of the Separatist fleet caving in, which was entirely true. And then of course the dynamic between the Sith Empire and the CIS, it was just a mess. Skywalker called on the bridge of the flagship, to which he told the Admiral they needed to make a push. Coburn was already on it. He told Skywalker to press forward. The light cruisers would be joining him. Anakin pushed the throttle in as his squad pushed their V-19s to keep up with Skywalker. Zala and her men were able to get back inside the interior of the respective vessels, while the Republic capital ships pressed their engines forward and lowered their shields so they could begin to open fire at maximum ability. It was a potential risk, but with the fragility of the Sith vessels, there wasn't really any risk. The largest ships in their fleet were support frigates, which were smaller than the Republic Arquentins-class light cruisers that were currently supporting the fleet, that is. The main point Admiral Coburn was trying to make was that they needed to wipe out the vessels before they escaped. It didn't take too long, especially with Skywalker leading the charge, to rip the fleet into screws and bolts. The Republic wasn't messing around, and Skywalker leading them made it abundantly clear to the Sith Empire that there was no surrender and there was no mercy. Perhaps that wasn't the Jedi way, and it's something that Natabre took a note of, but she didn't see it as a reflection of the dark side within Anakin. She'd already seen that, and this was not that. Once the fleet rallied up all of its vessels and promptly secured Malastare, Skywalker, Morden, Tano, and Issisia made their way to the bridge. Commander Cody and Admiral Coburn were of course there as well. Anakin told the command deck that he believed that they had a real opportunity to expand the front lines of the Republic. This initially confused the commanders on deck, but he explained himself. He told them that he believed they could bounce over to Thyferra and set up a base on the planet, as according to the scans from the long-range scanner, a system away, it seemed as if the planet was unoccupied space. Natabre pointed out that there seemed to be some sort of surge coming from the ground. Anakin smiled at her with a cockiness that suggested whatever the Sith were trying to build, they'd blow it into splinters. Commander Cody asked if they were suggesting they'd go to Thyferra and do a ground invasion, or if this was more so a raid where they could send some fighters down to the surface and bombard whatever the surface energy was out of existence. Anakin stopped for a moment. He told Cody that the chances are they would have to go in for a ground invasion, simply based on the fact that they needed to make sure whatever the Sith were building didn't have any clues or waypoints to the Star Forge. Admiral Coburn told Skywalker that the Council and Republic High Command structure would never agree to this mission. Natabre agreed with the Admiral. She suggested that it could be an unnecessary risk. Anakin shook his head, placing his hands on the table and leaning forward, suggesting that if they could take Thyferra, it could be the key to connecting the Republic to the Axis of Three. She looked at the galactic map. It was actually a smart idea. It would leave their flanks undefended, but if they did it, then perhaps they could get close to those 3 Republic planets. The core was so undefended, but if the Republic could have access to Bisk, Corellia, and Kuat, then the naval power structure would be increased. The Republic knew that this still existed because they were still getting the frequency showing that each planet was still maintained by the Republic. There were listening posts on all 3 worlds that were set up after the Sith return. The purpose was to inform the survivors elsewhere in the galaxy that they had survived, though maybe the Sith took them over and they were keeping the signal going. Zala spoke up for the first time. She told Master Skywalker and Morden that the frequency would immediately transmit a distress signal if there was an invasion on any of the planets. When some of the command looked over at her with confusion, she smiled with a little bit of embarrassment. She told them that she was reading through some of the specs on their construction during her free time. She apologized for interrupting, but they told her that she didn't need to apologize. She was a commander, and she had the ability to speak, just as long as it wasn't borderline insubordination. Skywalker continued and told them that they could legitimately do this and get away with a victory on Thyferra. They'd be able to open up a passageway all the way to the core and establish a foothold, a rock surrounded by a river, if you will. The Republic wouldn't be able to crumble. Admiral Coburn told Skywalker he could ask for a replacement fleet to show up here at Malastare while they were gone. Anakin nodded his head and told them that he looked forward to seeing them on the ground at Thyferra. Admiral Coburn turned his attention to the deckhands and prepared to get everything ready. Skywalker stood up and crossed his arms as Cody, Ahsoka, and Zala left the bridge. Natabre told Anakin that she wasn't sure about this. He shrugged his shoulders, telling her that they would be fine, reminding her that as long as they had each other, they would be alright. Natabre shook her head and suggested that it was more than that. It was bigger than all of them. Skywalker told her that she was being paranoid. Natabre admitted that she wasn't fond of him dismissing her concerns as such. She looked at him with a slight glare, suggesting that next time he wanted to say something like that, he should choose his words a bit better next time. Natabre stepped out of the room as Anakin stood in silence. He didn't really understand what he did wrong, but he shook it off in his head and waited for the jump to hyperspace. Hours later, Natabre and Zala would be inside of the training facilities. It wasn't the acrobatic challenge it was before, it was something different. Zala was standing on one of the platforms. It was moving and there were about a dozen training droids flying around. Anakin and Ahsoka came into the control room where Natabre was standing. Her arms were behind her back as she turned her head, enough to see them out the corner of her eye. She looked back towards the training facility. Anakin asked her how Zala was doing, and she praised her student before turning and addressing both of them with a bow. Ahsoka looked over to Anakin, realizing that there was something wrong with this. She was acting a little odd. Natabre asked Ahsoka and Anakin if they would like Zala to stop so Ahsoka could join her. Anakin asked if that was alright with her, and she nodded her head. Natabre turned around and flipped the switch that ended the challenge. Zala looked over at the command center, where Natabre pointed at the door. Moments later, Ahsoka popped into it. The challenge restarted with 24 training droids. Anakin walked up to Natabre and stood looking down into the training facility. He asked her what he said wrong, and she turned to him and told him that it was a dismissal of her concerns. She wasn't trying to be paranoid. She was trying to make sure they didn't do anything unorthodox to get them or their troops into danger. She understood the want to release the people from those 3 core worlds, but they were generals. It was more than just them. They had to care not just for their students, but their men too. Anakin told her that he understood, and he apologized for dismissing her in such a way. She smiled and thanked him before telling him that she wanted this to work as much as he did, but she still was having a bad feeling about it. Anakin asked why, and she felt comfort that she was being listened to. She told him that she was unsure. The Force just felt awry, especially when it comes to an energy source from the planet's surface, one without a defense fleet of any kind. Anakin understood the concerns, but what are the realistic chances of it being a trap? He told her that strategically speaking, the Sith Empire wouldn't put a fleet over Thyferra because the Separatists weren't actively engaging the front lines. They were holding their own planets. If Malastare was lost by the CIS and the Sith sent their fleet from Thyferra, therefore there shouldn't be any fleet to expect on that planet. It was strategically sound. She saw the point, but how long until the Sith Empire figured out that Malastare was lost? Anakin paused for a moment. He hadn't actually thought about that, but he quickly scavenged an answer. He suggested that they would be done and out before anyone ever arrived. She looked at him and then back to the students. Natabre said that she trusted his intuition, as he had hers during the Battle of Malastare. He thanked her and asked her about the situation regarding Zala. She smiled and told him that Zala was an amazing student. Sure, they didn't have a lot of time with each other, but truthfully, part of this was Natabre romanticizing the whole having a student thing. She always wanted to be a Jedi Master, and now she was, which made her feel good, and she felt like she could be a good Master. That, to her, was the most important thing ever, being a good Master. Anakin was glad to hear it was going well. She asked the same question and Anakin gave an answer, with some sass, and said that Ahsoka could be pretty snippy. Natabre laughed and said that she learned from the best. Anakin agreed for a moment before realizing that she was referring to him. He smiled and continued to watch the students work through their training. Ahsoka was fierce with a lightsaber. Zala, on the other hand, was quick, but her power wasn't like Ahsoka's. It was a discernible difference between the two of them at the moment. Zala was focused on her speed and gracefulness, while Ahsoka was focusing on her ferocity and accuracy. Both were good attributes to have, and they both equally represented their teachers in some way, shape, or form. After the session ended, Anakin and Natabre broke off again. They wanted to focus on their individual training with their students. Anakin had an idea regarding training Ahsoka, which involved the clone troopers. Ahsoka was initially confused, but she tried it out. After a couple deflected shots, she was hit with a stun round and was completely knocked out. On the other side of the ship, Zala and Natabre were sitting in the training room. Both of them were on their knees, and Natabre told her student that she wanted to strengthen the connection between the two of them. Zala was interested, and then Natabre told her already timid student that they would be sharing some of their past with each other. Natabre believed if they were to be an effective master and apprentice duo, then they needed to know each other. Zala went first. She told her master about everything that happened on Ahch-To. Natabre listened intently as the two of them sat on their knees with their eyes closed. Because while the both of them survived the fall of the temple on Coruscant, they both had very different experiences of the event. Zala told her master that in the moment she tried to get her friend, but she was pulled away by her mentor. The mentor didn't make it much further anyways because he was killed by a Sith Lord, whose face was covered in a mask. Zala remembered looking into his ghastly yellow eyes and pale face. It still gave her nightmares. The rest was a blur. The trip from Coruscant to Ahch-To didn't really matter. Zala told her master that when she felt like she came to, when everything stopped being a blur, everyone was different. Children aged like war veterans, Jedi fought like Sith, and there wasn't a light at the end of the tunnel. Zala told her master that she wasn't a bad kid, and she wasn't a bad Jedi. She was just always at the wrong place at the wrong time. She was just trying to help, and because she was breaking up fights, she was constantly seen as an agitator. Zala opened her eyes to look at her master, whose eyes were still closed. She told her master that as a Jedi, they weren't supposed to show their emotions. They weren't meant to feel what they had within them. But several nights she looked at the stars and wished she wasn't born. Several nights she hid her tears under silent cries. Several nights she stopped. She told her master she thought about running away and disappearing. Zala's eyes were stuck on her master's face. She admired the beauty of Natabre's stillness, and then she watched a singular tear flee her eye. Zala's lips shook and she felt shame. She pressed the sadness back inside her as she tried to silence herself again. Zala pulled her hands up to her face and pressed them against her mouth and covered it. The two of them sat in silence for what felt like hours, but it wasn't more than minutes. Natabre cleared her throat silently before telling Zala that she was sorry for assuming that she was anything but what she was. The student told her master that it wasn't her fault. It was no one's fault. It was the Sith, and the Jedi weren't prepared. Natabre told her student that she was wise for her years, and she was proud of her. Zala was silent, and Natabre continued, telling her student that everything she embodied was the best of what the Jedi were supposed to be, and she congratulated her for her determination to not let what surrounded her control her. Zala told her master that she was always afraid. Natabre opened her eyes and told her student that being afraid was only natural. She told Zala about the time she and Anakin were in a cave on Ahch-To, and she was afraid. She didn't explicitly say that she was afraid of Skywalker turning against her, just more so afraid. Maybe it wasn't the Jedi way, but the reality is that as sentients they would always feel such feelings. They would have to be strong enough to handle these things, and if they weren't, then they would be no better than the Sith. The two of them continued their very still and poignant conversation, relating to each other and understanding each other better. Ahsoka inside the hangar bay woke up. She asked how long she was out for, and Anakin smiled, telling her that it was an hour. Cody reached out his hand and helped her up. Anakin told her that it was time to go again. Ahsoka struggled to her feet as she shook her head and looked around. Her vision was a bit blurry, but she ignited her weapon. This time it took less stun rounds to incapacitate her. Ahsoka was back on the ground and knocked out. After she woke up, Anakin gave her a break, telling her that she had done well. It would take time to get used to, but once she got used to it, she'd be able to recover faster and get back into it faster. She asked Anakin what this training was, because it clearly wasn't reasonable. Anakin told her that it just so happened to be reasonable because it was for her survival. He wasn't training her to be a Jedi, he was training her to survive. Because to Anakin, that was the most important thing. He didn't want to lose her. If he lost her, he wouldn't know how to handle it truthfully, even having known her for so short a period of time. So the alternative was being the most rigorous trainer in the history of the Jedi Order. Ahsoka had to live with it too. She was given time to head back to her room and recover. Zala was sleeping in her room at the moment anyways. Ahsoka's practice was physically difficult, while Zala's was mentally and emotionally difficult. This was a key difference between both teachers and individuals as a whole. Anakin was focused on the war side of things, as he believed their bond would grow in due time, while Natabre was focused on what should be done in regards to understanding oneself, as she believed if Zala could come to peace with herself, then she could come to peace with the war around her. After learning about Zala's backstory and how she was constantly thrown under the bus, Natabre knew she made the best decision for her student. Zala could be pushed, and she would work hard, but because she was actively being listened to and understood, she'd have a much easier time developing into who she needed to become. At this point, Natabre knew that Zala would eventually become a great Jedi. It would just take time for her to see that within herself. As Natabre realized, she and her student were similar, just as Ahsoka and Anakin were similar. Two masters were gathered up in the hangar bay. They were talking about their respective situations and how they were handling them. Anakin told Natabre that Ahsoka was going through training really well. Natabre said the same thing about Zala. However, this discussion was more or less about their interest in the joint training and how it should be handled. It's not that there was anything wrong with it at the moment, rather it was the fact that maybe there should be more of a concentrated effort on teamwork in the joint training rather than individual work. Skywalker believed that this was because of Ahsoka and Zala's sizes. The acrobatic work would be very important. However, it would likely be more important to know how to fight together, or with another Jedi around. Anakin told Natabre about the whole thing that he was doing with Ahsoka, and she found it to be borderline unethical. To have her own men shoot her, it just seemed kinda weird. Anakin believed that because of the training the Sith troopers had, it'd be easier to have the clones fire at them. Natabre did see the point and told Anakin that she'd begin to strategize with some ideas of how they could take Anakin's concept and expand upon it. He smiled and she told him that it was a great idea, in all honesty. She just never would have thought about having the men fire at her student. She nudged him playfully before making her way to the bridge, and Anakin followed. In the coming hours, they would arrive at a hyperspace. The planet was still. It was kinda weird. There was a small vessel floating outside the planet, and well, it wasn't exactly small. It just looked that way from where it was. Anakin requested a squad of troopers to go investigate the vessel, while he and the others made their way to the surface of the planet. Admiral Coburn told Skywalker that they would keep the fleet at a reasonable distance in case the Sith Empire forces came to the planet and blindsided them. In other words, as long as they kept posted here, then they would be fine. The Sith wouldn't be able to trap them on planet, which in reality is all that mattered. The Jedi got aboard an LAAT along with a couple of other ones that launched up from the skies and made their way down to the surface of the planet. Anakin had his communication on, and he was waiting for any transmissions from anyone. An LAAT, on the other hand, moved its way onto the vessel that was sitting above the planet. The group of transports at the same time landed on the surface of Thyferra. Skywalker got out of the ship first and immediately noticed something was off. Natabre jumped down from the ship and looked at Anakin. The two of them shared a set of thoughts as Anakin's expression lost the confidence it had on the bridge of the capital ship. Zala and Ahsoka jumped down and the clones filed out of the ships as well. Anakin told the men to keep close to each other. There were some cities on the planet, but they weren't near them. The reason they were here, in the middle of this field, was because of the surge of energy, though there wasn't necessarily anything for them to lock onto. They were just kind of aimlessly looking into openness. There were some fields, and there was a largest hill in front of them. Anakin looked at Natabre, and she nodded her head, suggesting that she would come with him. The two Padawans followed closely behind, while Cody and the clones moved forward, checking out the area. As the Jedi were walking up the hill, Skywalker and Morden got a communication from the team set to enter the ship above the atmosphere. They said that the ship seemed pretty devoid of life. Part of them felt like the ship hadn't been activated in eons, though at the same time it partially felt like there was something terribly wrong about all this. They didn't know what it was, but they told General Skywalker that they would continue to provide updates to them as they continued their mission. Natabre told Anakin that something felt wrong. Before they could get to the top of the hill, Ahsoka stopped, and Zala noticed immediately. Anakin and Natabre turned around and asked what was wrong. Ahsoka shuddered, and she told them that she felt terrible darkness. She didn't know what it was, but it was haunting, and it made her skin crawl. Both masters turned their attention back towards Ahsoka, and she looked from the ground up towards them. Natabre told Anakin that they should go, and he shook it off. He told Ahsoka that she didn't want to cross over the hill, then she didn't need to. Anakin turned and started up the hill. Zala followed him, and then Natabre and Ahsoka did. When they reached the top of the hill, they looked down to see a ghostly figure standing in the middle of the field. For whatever reason, the field looked dead. All of its coloration had vanished, and this ghost didn't move. Anakin told everyone to stay close, as he put his hands on his lightsaber and stepped forward. Natabre grabbed his elbow and looked at him. He smiled with an arrogance, telling her that it wasn't a big deal. He put his arm forward and out of her grip and started walking towards the ghost. The hill on this side was much smaller than it was on the other side, so they descended rather quickly. Anakin pulled his blade into his hand without igniting it. As he got closer, a communication from the vessel came over. The clones were crying out in both terror and agony. They tried to relay a message. Anakin stopped for the first time since their arrival to Thyferra and felt a wave of fear wash over his body. The ghost could hear the sound emanating from the clones on board of his ship. The shadow slowly rose to his feet. He spoke out, telling Skywalker that he'd been expecting him to bite the bait. The failure of the Empire of Malastare was simply a test of his arrogance, a test to see if he'd be foolish enough to come to Thyferra, to die along with every citizen here. The four Jedi ignited their lightsabers. Anakin shook a shiver from his shoulders, stiffening his upper body and preparing for whatever came his way. A blood-curdling laugh slipped from the shadow, and it turned around. There was a horrid mask. Anakin spun his blade in his hand, telling the ghost that he had faced worse adversaries before. Nihilus laughed, telling him that Sion was foolish. But he wasn't. Anakin rushed forward. Natabre hesitated but followed him. Nihilus moved like a flash, crushing his blade against Anakin's. The force and the speed were something Anakin had never seen before, and it threw him from his feet. Ahsoka, Zala, and Natabre came running to his aid. They threw their lightsabers forward in an attempt to drive Nihilus back, but his finesse resembled that of his master. While his master used 3 lightsabers, Nihilus made his lightsaber feel like 3. The Padawans were thrown from their feet, but Natabre stood long enough until she too was thrown down. Anakin got to his feet. Nihilus told Anakin that his mistakes would cost the lives of all he brought with him. At that moment, Admiral Coburn radioed over and told Skywalker it was a trap. The Sith fleet was here. They needed to evacuate before anything happened. He would send a light cruiser to pick them up, while the rest of the fleet had a fighting retreat. Luckily, Coburn stationed the fleet far away from the planet. The only issue is the troopers on the planet that had to get to the fleet immediately. If they didn't, they'd be stuck and they would die. Skywalker cried out a terrible no. It was a mix of fury and emotional betrayal. He couldn't believe he fell for the trap. Skywalker rushed Nihilus. But he wasn't here to deal with a Jedi. He was here to torture one. Skywalker was parried a number of times as his allies tried to get up and fight against the monster. Anakin could barely keep up with his pace. The tragedy is, Nihilus was far from the best duelist the Sith had. He was talented, but he wasn't one of their best. Sion was just arrogant in the same fashion that Skywalker was being now. Nihilus was going to expose it. He thrusted Skywalker from his feet and extinguished his lightsaber into his belt. Before throwing his hands forward, Natabre, Zala, and Ahsoka fell backwards. Nihilus turned to Skywalker and told him that first, he would watch his allies as they died before him, and then he'd be brought to the Sith, where he would die alone, knowing he had failed his only friends. Anakin cried out as he watched the 3 of them have the Force essence drained. Anakin jumped forward, attacking Nihilus, who released his grip on the 3 who fell to the ground. Anakin's blade never met Nihilus. Red lightning fled his fingers, and Skywalker was forced to block it. But Nihilus was using so much that the red lightning trickled over the lightsaber and crawled across his skin, ripping through his Jedi uniform and burning him. Anakin fell to his knees, still holding his lightsaber above his head as he cried out in agony. The clones on the other side of the hill were given orders to retreat back to the fleet, but they heard the lightsaber duel. They finally made it to the top of the hill. Cody saw the Jedi on the ground and told the LAATs to go in and provide cover fire. The clones rushed forward and began firing. Anakin fell backwards and looked over. He tried to call out to them, trying to get them to stop, but it was too late. A number of the blaster shots were stopped in midair and launched back at the clones. Several of the clone troopers dropped dead at this, killed by their own shots. Cody didn't understand how this was at all possible. He tried to get the men together to help the Jedi, but it seemed like it wasn't working. Skywalker turned back at Nihilus, who stood over them, like a man possessed. He leaned down and grabbed Anakin's face and looked into his eyes with a soulless expression. Nihilus told Skywalker that even if he survives, he'll never forget. Nihilus shoved Anakin's face into the dirt. The rest was a blur. Everything moved in slow motion, but it was in an echo. The LAATs blasted away at Nihilus, and one of them was brought down onto a group of clones. Nihilus seemed to disappear when a wave of V-19s came down for cover fire. In the air, the Republic light cruiser sat above everything, waiting for the Jedi to return. Skywalker remembered being helped up and his arm slung over Cody's shoulder as he treaded himself along to get to the LAAT before collapsing on the inside. Waxer had Zal in his arms and Boyle had Ahsoka in his. Natabre was helped into the LAAT the same time Anakin was. The trip to the Republic light cruiser was quick, and before they knew it, they were back in the hyperspace. When Anakin woke up, he was petrified. His heart rate was through the roof as a clone medic stood with him and shook his head, putting his hand on his shoulder and pressing him back to bed. Anakin put his hand on the clones and asked what happened. The trooper told the general that everyone was okay. The fleet was en route to Malastare to meet up with the backup fleet that has since replaced them. Everyone would make a recovery, but now he had the rest. Anakin shook his head before he slipped back into sleep. When Anakin next woke up, Natabre was sitting up next to him. She had her eyes closed and she could feel they had woken up. She asked him how he was feeling. Anakin jumped up and asked if she was okay. She nodded her head, and then she slowly opened her eyes. One of her eyes was bloodshot. She asked Anakin if he was okay. He apologized profusely. He never should have taken them to Thyferra. Natabre agreed, but everyone was alright. For the most part. He should see it as a lesson more than anything else. Anakin reached over and asked her about her eye. She put her hand up and slowly guided his back to his bed. She told him that the Sith they encountered used force drain on them. She'd be fine, it would just take some time for her to fully recover. Anakin remembered instantaneously. What happened to the troops? Natabre frowned. She told Anakin that out of the 57 men they landed with, only 14 returned alive. 5 of those troopers were injured, and one of those 5 was mortally wounded. Chances are he wouldn't survive the trip to Malastare. Anakin leaned back on the bed and asked what he had done. Natabre didn't respond. She couldn't. She tried to warn him and he didn't listen. This was his lesson. She patted him gently and told him to rest. He would need it. She got up and walked over to where her student was. She was still sleeping. For the Padawans, it was much worse for them. Natabre was alright because she was an adult, though Nihilus took a lot from them. It was a short burst, and it did an incredible amount of damage. He specialized in force drain, and if it weren't for the clones, they wouldn't have survived. Anakin lay on his bed for hours, staring at the ceiling. Eventually, he got up and went to Ahsoka's side. She was still sleeping. Natabre and Zala had already left the room. When Ahsoka woke up, Anakin asked her how she was feeling as she rubbed her head in a confused manner. She wasn't sure. Where was she? Or what happened? Anakin told her and expressed in his sincerest apologies to her for having put her and the other two in that position. She told him it was okay, but he wasn't going to just forgive himself that easily. This wasn't okay, and it needed to be addressed accordingly. When Ahsoka eventually went back to sleep, Anakin made his way to the bridge and transmitted a recording to the rest of the fleet. He apologized profusely for everything that happened in the previous mission, and he told them that he never wanted to mess up like that again. He was going to take full responsibility for the loss, and the decision being that it was his. Anakin told them all that he didn't want to let them down again, and that he never would. The losses on Thyferra were terrible, and they were unacceptable. He would accept any punishment levied against him upon the return to Malastare. The men were appreciative for the message, and it connected them to Skywalker unlike ever before. Not just him, but the other Jedi General. Their ability to own up for their mistakes and handle adversity with a cunning morality made them all the more relatable. The clones greatly appreciated it. Skywalker wouldn't be seen much longer, being that since Ahsoka, Natabre, and Zala were okay, he was with the clones in the medical room. The clones who had been wounded, 3 of the 5 had already left the medical bay, and the 4th one was heading out soon. The clone who was mortally wounded was still in recovery, and his chances were slimmer. Cody came into the room to see how Lucky was doing. That's what they called the clone, at least. The two of them talked about the clone trooper, and Cody mentioned that if he pulled through, then he'd have to embrace the name Lucky. He always hated being called that. He believed it was just juvenile, and he wanted to reject it. But his pod mates always teased him with the name, and his squad mates just furthered it. It wasn't their fault, he was just a lucky shot. Apparently, really lucky because on Thyferra, he managed to shoot himself in the chest with a long rifle. When Cody eventually left, Anakin was stuck in his thoughts. Lucky was surviving, but he was fading in and out. Anakin thought about what he put his close friends through. He put Zala and Ahsoka through more torment than they needed to, and he almost killed his closest friend Natabre. It really put a perspective on everything for him. Seeing that he nearly killed Natabre, he began to realize how high in regards he held her. Anakin hadn't fully moved on from Padme yet, her death only being a few months old, if that. He knew he didn't need an attraction to see value in Natabre because she was her. He loved her presence and he loved having her as a friend, as that was what he needed most in life. She was perfect in his eyes. Sure, maybe a bit more Jedi than he, but still perfect. Maybe he did fancy the attraction to her, though he couldn't be sure. All he knew is that with her life on the line at Tython, he was willing to do anything to save her. And having put her life in danger here, he realized how much he really cared. Maybe he just hadn't put it in perspective since the fall of Coruscant, how much she really meant to him. Considering Kenobi, Padme, and most of the people he was close to actually died, he didn't realize how open those wounds were. Natabre filled a hole in his heart. Ahsoka and Zala did the same. The bond with Natabre was obviously much different than the one with Zala and Ahsoka. He couldn't help but feel like he let them down with his actions. His failure was a lesson about patience, leadership, and the reality of being a Jedi Master. When they eventually returned to Malastare, it turned out that Clone Trooper Lucky would own his name, and survive the loss at Thyferra. Anakin, on the other hand, would prepare to be demoted and be sent back to Ahch-To. But as it turns out, according to Admiral Coburn, the Republic was preoccupied. General Plo Koon was last reported on Mandalore, and General Windu had another engagement on Gamorre that he had to currently attend to. Republic High Command was also unavailable, so Admiral Coburn told Skywalker that he'd make an arrangement with him. Anakin listened and he liked the terms. Coburn would take full control of all fleet movements, and Skywalker would not be able to order or change them around. On the other hand, Coburn would make no mention of what happened on Thyferra to anyone. It was a slap on the wrist, and truthfully, Anakin believed it to be a bit superficial. But he could stay here with his best friend, and that's what mattered to him. He told the Admiral that he would continue to try and better himself on the daily, so that they would never have an encounter like the one they just had again. However, Skywalker needed to warn the other Jedi about the individual they encountered at Thyferra. He never got the name of the ghostly figure with a mask, so Anakin started to refer to him as the Ghost. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewoo670, Anikush Dag Runner, CT7567, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan Malik, Johnny Naguin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calic, Youngly Slayer 66, Madman Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, the main 3 first names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. The next episode is coming out next Saturday. If you want to support me in other ways, go check out the Patreon. There are extra updates for the Sith Clone Wars on there. Otherwise, I love you all, spread the love, and remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.